Math 3, Unit 2, Section 4. Today we're talking about solving by using square roots. Now, if you look at these problems down here, this one's set up kind of different. You could solve this two different ways. One thing is that you could always multiply these out if you wanted to, okay? But an easier way is, since this is already squared, you can set this so that you get the square by itself and then take the square roots of both sides, and it's actually a little easier process. But it only works if it is set up as a square, okay? So on the first one, do you see how x is already a square? And so all we're going to do is take the square root of both sides. What is the square root of x? X. But the thing that you have to be careful about is when you're taking the square root of something, we can't have a negative inside that root. And so the square root of x squared is actually the absolute value of x. And so whenever we're taking the square root of both sides, the x side that we're taking the square root of is going to be an absolute value, okay? And some of you might have learned this a little differently, but in the long run, this is going to help you out with what we're doing in class. And then what is the square root of 36? 6. So at this point, do you see how the absolute value is by itself? So we would set up two equations, and we would get x equals 6, and what would the other one be? Very good. Now, we could have this one, we could solve it differently, and I'm just going to show you because this one is like an easier problem. But we have x squared equals 36. We can set this equal to 0 by subtracting 36 to both sides. X squared minus 36 equals 0. Set these up as squares. X squared minus 6 squared equals 0. Since they're both squares, we can factor, right? We get x minus 6, x plus 6 equals 0. I'm showing you guys that we could solve this both ways, correct? Which way was easier? The first one, okay? Now, see how much more work I had to do from here down, right? Where on this one, I just was able to take the square root of both sides, get the absolute value, and set those equal. So you can do it either way. On these, you could multiply everything out if you want to, but it's just going to be a lot more work. So do we agree that if it's set up as a square, we should just go ahead and take the square root? Good. Okay, so example 2. What's the first thing I would do here? You want to get the square by itself, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is what? Add 17. Okay, and I see a couple of you on your cell phones. Please put those away and make sure you're paying attention. X plus 2 squared equals, and 27 plus 17 is? 44. Very good. Okay? Is the square by itself? Yes. So what am I going to do? Square root of both sides. So when we're taking the square root, the side with the x on it, it's going to be absolute value. Okay? So absolute value of x plus 2 equals the square root of 44. But I would like us to simplify this and break it down. So how can I break down 44? 44 is 4 and 11, correct? And when you have square roots, in order to pull something out in front, you need to have how many? 2 of the same number. Can 4 break down? Yeah, so 4 breaks down to 2 and 2, so I have a pair of 2's and an 11 left over. And so how would I write that answer? Very good. 2 square root 11. So I always box my leftover numbers because if I had multiple numbers left over, I'd multiply them together and they'd stay under the root. Anything that's a pair, I bring out in front. Okay, so at this point now, what am I going to do? Very good. Set up two equations is correct. So we have x plus 2 equals 2 root 11. And my other equation is x plus 2 equals, good, negative 2 root 11. And then all we're going to do is get x by itself. So here I subtract 2 to both sides. Can I subtract 2 from 2 root 11? No. If this had a root 11 with it, we could. But this 2 root 11 cannot be combined with this 2 unless we change it to decimal form. So my answer is going to be x equals 2 root 11 minus 2. Or negative 2 plus 2 root 11. Actually, normally you have the part that's like a whole number in front and anything with the root at the end. So on this one, when I subtract 2 to both sides, the best way to write it is x equals negative 2 minus 2 root 11. So we have 2 answers here. Oops. Any questions? Say that again. The negative 2 and the positive 2? Because the positive 2 is actually connected with the root 11. And so if you were to like put this into a calculator, and I'm just going to show you really quick, because it's not really like a 2 and a root 11 like being added, they're actually being multiplied. So if you have 2 square root 11, that actually equals the number 6.63. And so if you were, let's say, to do negative 2 and positive 2 and you just wrote your answer as root 11, the actual answer, if I went here, should be, you know, 4.6, sorry, around 4.63, okay? And if you just take root 11, that answer is not the same if you had just taken the 2 away. Does that make sense? So anytime you have a root connected to it, unless you have matching roots, you can't simplify there. All right, number 3. What am I going to do first? Good. Subtract 2 is correct. So we're subtracting 2 to both sides. I have 3 parenthesis x plus 4 squared equals 12. Next, what will I do? Very good. Divide by 3 to both sides. Okay, we get x plus 4 squared equals 4. Good. What am I going to do now? Good. Square root both sides. When I take the square root, it becomes a what? Good. Absolute value of x plus 4 equals, and what is the square root of 4? 2. At this point, what do? Very good. Make 2 equations. So my first equation is x plus 4 equals 2. And the other equation is? Perfect. We solve here by subtracting 4 to both sides. And I get x equals negative 2. Over here I subtract 4 to both sides and x equals negative 6. So I have my 2 answers. Okay, example 4, I want you to try on your own. When you get the answer, raise your hand, and I will come by and check it.
If you are unacceptable right now, good job. You pass. The rest of you, shame on you. Oh, you're adding one to those sides. You're not subtracting. Because you're doing the opposite to me. You're spreading both sides. Alright. Perfect. Good. Nicely done. Good. Perfect. No. Okay, so I hear when you're taking the square root of both sides, it's good. 4 negative 2? Okay. Yep. Okay, good. So the correct answer was 4 negative 2. Saw a couple errors out there, but most of you did great with getting the square by itself. Okay, and so we end up 38 minus 2 is 36. We divide by 4 to both sides. X minus 1 squared equals 9. Now don't forget, when you're taking the square root, you're taking the square root of both sides. So we have the absolute value of x minus 1 equals 3. Then we set up the equations. X minus 1 equals 3. X minus 1 equals negative 3. Add 1 to both sides. X equals 4. Add 1 to both sides. X equals negative 2. Are there any questions there? Okay. We are going to turn the page. We are not going to do all these problems. Okay, so on number 1, what's the first thing I'm going to do? Very good. Take the square root of both sides, and we end up with what? Close. Absolute
value.
Very good. Absolute value of x plus 3 equals 5. We set up our equations. X plus 3 equals 5, and x plus 3 equals negative 5. From that point, we want to get x by itself, and so I subtract 3 to both sides, and I get x equals 2. Here, we subtract 3 to both sides, and x equals
2. Oh, negative 8.
negative 8. Very good. We just did opposite, huh? Perfect. All right. Let's do one that's slightly more difficult. Okay, I would like you guys to try number 4 on your own. Oh, the second number 4, sorry. Oh, my bad. You guys already did this number 4? Fine, we can do this one. I don't care. Whatever. I know, that one's too easy.
Just do both.
Yeah, there. Avery, you're so smart. Both. Get them both done. Okay. I'll check your answers for either one as you get them. $75 divided by 3 is 25. About quarters. 3 quarters make 75 cents. Okay, for time's sake here, I'm going to check 2 more and then I'm going to start going through them. Actually, this one. Oh,
I thought we had
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so the first number 4, the answers were 9 and negative 1. The second number 4 were 3 and negative 5. Okay, so first number 4, I'm going to work through it. I'm going to go a little quickly because I think most of you have it done. If you need me to explain anything though, or if I'm going too fast, just stop me. That's okay. So I first divided by 3 to both sides to get my square by itself. Next, we take the square root and we get the absolute value of x minus 4 equals 5. Then I set up my two equations. X minus 4 equals 5 and x minus 4 equals negative 5. Add 4 to both sides, x equals 9. Add 4 to both sides, x equals negative 1. Okay, the second number 4, what am I going to do? Very good, subtract 1 to both sides. 2 parentheses x plus 1 squared equals 32. Next step is 2. Good, divide by 2. We get x plus 1 squared equals 16. Next step is 2. Square root both sides, which makes? Good. Set each of these equal to 4, so we get x plus 1 equals 4, and the other one is x plus 1 equals negative 4. Subtract 1, we get x equals 3. Subtract 1, we get x equals negative 5. Now I know I went kind of quickly there. Is there a place where I lost anybody that you want me to go back to? All right, these last problems. All we're doing is simplifying. So you know when you get to a problem that's not factorable, use the quadratic formula. The only thing here is that they actually just set up the quadratic formula for you and all you're doing is simplifying. Okay, the first thing you should do though is simplify under your root. I normally just kind of go through it and cross things out, and so let's check this out. What is 7 squared? 49, and then all of those numbers there get multiplied together. Okay, it doesn't matter the order you multiply in, because when you're multiplying you can use the commutative property, which means that no matter how you multiply these numbers, they will always end up being the same answer. So, negative 4 times 2 is negative 8, and then negative 8 times negative 4 will make positive 32. So make sure that you notice that there are 2 negative numbers there that end up making a positive. Okay, here 2 times 2 makes 4. No, because you have a negative and another negative that are all multiplying together, which makes it a positive. And 49 plus 32, what does that equal? 81. So when I rewrite this right now, we have negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 81 all over 4. What is the square root of 81? 9. So now I actually have negative 7 plus or minus 9 over 4, and we can split those into 2 equations. Okay? So we have negative 7 plus 9 divided by 4, and then my other one is what? Negative 7 minus 9. So the plus or minus is what makes our 2 equations. So one has a plus 9, one has a minus 9, divided by 4, and then we simplify. What's 9 minus 7? 2. And 2 over 4, what does that reduce to? 1/2. Here, negative 7 minus 9 is negative 16 divided by 4, which makes negative 4. So x equals 1/2 and negative 4. Okay, questions? All right, let's move on to number 2. What is 10 squared? Good. What is negative 4 times 3 times 5? Negative 60. And what is 100 minus 60? 40. What is 2 times 3? 6. So we have 10 plus or minus the square root of 40 all over 6. What do I need to do with that square root? Simplify. Okay? We need to see if we have any pairs of numbers. What does 40 break down to? Good. 10 and 4. And then can 4 break down to 2 and 2, right? Now 10 can break down to 2 and 5, but that's not going to give me any pairs, right? And so I'm not going to break down 10 because it's just a waste of my time. Okay? So when I rewrite this out now, I have 10 plus or minus what? 2 root 10. So 10 didn't have the pair. So 10, that's box, stays in the square root box. Okay? Over 6. Now, the reason why I split up the other equations is because I knew I could simplify because they were all whole numbers. Since I have roots here on this next one, I can't really simplify everything where it's going to make different answers. But if you look at all of the outside numbers, if they all have something in common, you can reduce. If only 2 of them have something in common, you can't reduce. Okay? So the root is kind of on its own, but the number in front of the root and the bottom number and the front number have to have something in common. So what do they have anything in common that we can reduce by? 2. And so we're going to reduce each of them by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So you can put a 1 here, or if there isn't a number in front, it automatically means 1. Correct? And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. So unless they all have something in common, you can't reduce. Okay? And the root is, you don't have to worry about that. It's connected with the 2. So we have 5 plus or minus root 10 over 3. Or again, you could have had 1 root 10. Okay, so we're just going to do one more. Example 3, this is our last one. For time's sake, we're just going to do it together. What is negative 6 squared? Very good, positive 36. And when we multiply negative 4 times 4, that's negative 16. And negative 16 times 5 make very good, positive 80. And we add those together and it makes 116. 2 times 4 is 8. So we write this out. We have 6 plus or minus the square root of 116, all divided by 8. So the next thing we need to do is what? Very good. Break down the root. Since this ends in an even number, I know it's divisible by 2. Okay? And so we break it down, and it's 2. And what's half of 116? 58 is correct. Okay? 58 ends in an even number, and so I know that's also divisible by 2. And half of 58 is 29. Can 29 break down any further? Very good. And so we have a pair of 2's and a 29 that's left over. So when I write this out, I have 6 plus or minus 2 root 29 over 8. Can I simplify any further? Yes. What can I do? Good. Reduce at each one of them by 2. And so this becomes a 3. This one cancels out, and this becomes a 4. And actually, we should write our answers that this is actually x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 29 over 4. And back here, this one was also x equals. Are there any questions?